looks like our speaker is here. Jamie Whitaker is the Vice President of Forensic Services with Mental Health America of Indiana. Jamie will be sharing about the Integrated Reentry and Correctional Support Program and the pilot program in the state. So welcome, Jamie.
Thank you so much for inviting me here today. Again, I apologize for getting in. I'm in a new building in the south part of the state, and for some reason, it would not let me get into this link. So I deeply appreciate your patience. So I am the Vice President of Forensic Services at Mental Health America of Indiana, and I'm here today to talk about the Integrated Reentry and Correctional Support Program. So we'll go through our PowerPoint here. When we look at the jails and here in the state of Indiana, especially when it has to do with the SUD and mental health, some of the questions that we've been asking over the last year are, how do we reduce jail populations and identify those who benefit from treatment? How do we increase successful reentry? How do we reduce overdoses and overdose death upon release and reentry? How do we increase recovery treatment engagement? How do we decrease barriers to treatment? And ultimately, how do we help people manage distress and some of the challenges that people face while they're incarcerated? So this last fall, we began to meet with the Division of Mental Health and Addiction and Next Level Recovery with the Governor's Office and Mental Health America to talk about this idea of, could we develop some programming in some of the jails here in Indiana that would be successful, and exactly what would that look like? So we're very excited to, in the past, there has been some great programs that have been successful, and one of those programs was in Howard County, Indiana. That was supported by Howard County Sheriff Jerry Asher, Commissioner Paul Wyman, and Mayor Tyler Moore. And that program had been going from like 2019 to 2021. So some of the conversation we began to have in the fall was, would it be possible for us to expand that programming? One, what would it look like to expand it? Two, is there anything we'd like to change about the programming that happened and the program that was in the jail, or anything we'd like to add? And then three, would it be possible to create a model that would work for both small counties, large counties, urban and rural? Could it work on a regional model, or would it have to be county specific? And so we began to have these discussions. And again, the goal was to be much more expansive of what we were doing before, because now, instead of it just being something that was built within some funding for a specific project, we had some funding from Recovery Works, so it allowed us to have some ways to expand some of that. And of course, Mental Health America, because they'd had so much success with other great peer supported services like Indiana Recovery Network and Indiana Addiction Issues Coalition, I think that Mental Health America was a great place to look at piloting these programs. So again, when we looked at exactly how we would approach that, it made sense to look at some of the successes and some of the infrastructure that was already in place. So one of the greatest successes to look at was the Indiana Recovery Network regional recovery hubs. And so since the infrastructure for this had already been pretty much expanded across the state, and there were so many successful hubs that we would have to work with, we decided that step one would be, we would look at the infrastructure that was done with the hubs, and we would build off that. So the things, when we ultimately lined it up to about 20 different, I'd say about 20 different organizations across the state that had hubs, and we wanted to say, well, what would we do? How would we define which are the best sites to look at? So we measured, we created a readiness survey, and we measured, the sheriff's willingness to collaborate with recovery supports in the jail, the city county leadership, and how well the city county leadership was willing to collaborate, courts, prosecutors, the public defender's office, supervision and community corrections, and were they willing to work on sequential intercept model development and recovery supports? And then ultimately, do they have a successful and strong recovery community organization there in their community? So we kind of, through that readiness survey, we measured each one of the counties, and we ultimately narrowed it down to about 9 counties that had most of these factors. And there were actually 6 counties that had all of the factors. And out of that 6, we picked 5 counties. So we chose Davies, Dearborn, Scott, Delaware, and Blackford were the 5 counties that we narrowed it down through this process. It took about 2 or 3 months of going through and a lot of interviews and phone calls, but we narrowed it down to those 5 counties. When you look at the IRACS program, the rest of the infrastructure with the teams and the partnerships, the teams are broken down into a supervisor, so a peer supervisor, the forensic peers, and the forensic peers are the ones that are doing the day-to-day intakes and demographic information, measuring recovery capital, all the surveys that the peers do, and then the engagement coordinators. The engagement coordinators are in charge of all of the peer groups and look at really a lot of that one-on-one engagement. And so ongoing one-on-one engagement are the engagement coordinators. The reentry coordinators and the reentry coordinators begin to work once someone is designated as getting out of jail. The reentry coordinators begin to work with that individual and stay with them for 30 days after their release. And the same thing with the resource navigators. Resource navigators, all they do, these are peers that ultimately just look at getting resources, whether it be treatment resources or housing, food, clothing, transportation, employment. These resource navigators, that's all they do every week is look at providing resources for people. And then ultimately they collaborate with a licensed health insurance navigator, which with the IRACS program, we use Recovering Kids and Families. Some of the supports they provide one-on-one peer support, intake support, surveys and resources, group mental health support, group SUD support, reentry planning and support, and then of course the warm handoff. And the great thing about using the regional recovery hubs is since they already have really successful community teams, this allowed us to have a jail team and a community team that are working together. So we can have this continuum of peer support from the time someone is incarcerated all the way till weeks, months, even years after they re-enter from the jail, and stay with them as long as they need to. The partnerships, the collaboration with the IRACS program is really integral, that we collaborate very closely with city county leadership. They're a part of the jail team. So they're in the jail 40 hours a week, 5 days a week, 40 hours a week, working as a part of the jail team. So if COVID comes, the teams don't get shut down. They don't get put out of the jail. We continue to work 40 hours a week, regardless of what the circumstances are with the individuals. And it really allows a strong collaboration and allows the teams a way to really provide a lot of support. There's a strong collaboration. Each one of the peer teams has a pretrial officer that is working very closely, identified from the community. Some of them are housed in community corrections and some of those are housed in community supervision, but each one of the sites has a pretrial probation officer or corrections officer that works with the teams. That helps us understand how we can collaborate more closely with the courts and make sure the work we're doing is aligned with what is really currently going on in their legal process and how we can be responsive to that. And then ultimately, every one of the teams ultimately has one of the peer coaches is assigned to the courts and collaborates very closely along with the resource navigator with the court system. So we work directly with the courts, the prosecutor, the public defender's office, and of course we work very closely with the mental health providers in the community. The basis of the IRACS program is meant to operate off of what was called the sequential intercept model, or the SIM model. The SIM model is a national model that's used ultimately to look at efficiency and effectiveness in the problem-solving courts and into the court systems, and ultimately look at the legal process of individuals and what ways we can build in intercepts and diversion and keep people out of incarceration and get people into more intensive treatments according to their levels of need. So the IRACS program, when you look at its collaboration with the Indiana Recovery Network, we're able to really provide peer support at all 5 levels of the SIM model. So as intercept 0 and 1 would very much be the Indiana Recovery Network in collaboration with other community partners. And those peer teams are providing, in the peer support spectrum, those peer teams are providing a lot of preventative efforts to try and keep people from incarceration or keep people from inside the justice system. Once they do come into the justice system, then the IRACS program takes over intercept 2 and works intercept 2, 3, and 4. And then ultimately, and does some work in level 5 until we hand off at that 30-day mark. And then we're handing them back off to the community-based team at the IRN. And that way we're ultimately carrying a pretty strong continuum of peer support across the full spectrum. Again, outlaying this a little bit further, when you look at exactly at the IRACS program, it shows the intakes, the CAT surveys that we do, the connecting and building safety individuals while they're incarcerated. So looking at risk management while they're in jail, the one-on-one peer support, making sure that we're really identifying what people's stories are and getting that information back out to people, advocating for people that we firmly believe might benefit more from treatment, rather than sitting in jail. Trying to get mental health providers in to provide further assessments so we can, again, further advocate for people where necessary. And then really trying to identify areas and ways where we can intervene in someone's story and try and create some additional alternatives. And then, again, and that kind of goes across the full spectrum until we begin to look at reentry, where we're planning resource navigation, resources, recovery planning, and then making sure that the individuals are prepared for that transition back to the community or transition to the Department of Corrections if they're going to be going there, and making sure that we're providing the support they need. The entire program is built around what we call engagement pathways. And so the engagement pathways are designed ultimately to provide the teams a way to understand how to partner with an individual according to that's relevant and responsive to their legal process. And most peers don't have access to understand exactly what the legal processes are or the relationships behind what's driving some of the current circumstances of the people who are in the jails. So what we wanted to do was define different pathways where the peers would understand how they could respond to individuals in this way. And so we kind of have called those levels of care. So our way as peers, so if you look on the left, you'll see level A, B, C, D, and E. A level A means they're going to be in jail for a while. And while they're in jail, we're going to provide them a whole host of services and supports and collaborate with other partners to make sure that we're doing as much as we can to support and advocate and provide additional resources to people while they're in jail. If they're designated as a level B, then we're going to begin to work with those individuals because we know they're getting out sometime in the next 30 to 90 days. We want to begin to start recovery planning, resource navigation, and making sure that we're ready for their reentry. And we're communicating with all community partners to make sure that there's one plan that the peers can support and that the reentry peers can provide them support with as they reenter. A level C, ultimately, it means someone has been identified as either returning or going to the Indiana Department of Corrections for an undetermined amount of time. We are collaborating very closely with the Indiana Department of Corrections. And if we do identify someone as being sentenced to DOC, we are sending their intake information and all relevant information we have over to IDOC, begin to look at how we can advocate for some of the needs the individuals have had, any kind of assessments that our treatment partners have done, or anything we've learned about the individuals that might be relevant for their transition to IDOC. If they're a level D, we know they're going to be getting out within 24 to 72 hours. And we have a kind of what we call a crisis response, in which we have a whole emergency list of things we go through between navigation and reentry support to make sure that either we're getting with people, or if they've been released over a weekend, that we're getting them on the radar and making sure that our community team, our community partners at IRN know who they are and trying to get them on the radar because they've already been released. And then we do have a level E, which means individuals have been identified as not interested in services. And we continue to touch base with individuals who say, hey, I'm not interested. What we found so far is that each one of our jails have about a 90 to 97% engagement rate. So we have a lot of people when we first started that were saying, hey, I'm going to prison, or I'm going here and I'm not really, you guys can't do anything for me. Well, then they later learned that we are collaborating with IDOC. So we've had a lot of people come back and the engagement numbers have really risen quite a bit. So we're really excited that all of our jails have a really high level of engagement. I mean, I know that Delaware County, speaking for that specifically, I just left there day before yesterday. I know they're at a 94% engagement rate. They have 356 inmates in the jail right now. And they have about 42 of those inmates are out of county. So those are people that are being held for other counties, and we normally don't engage with them. But out of the individuals who are safe to connect with and that are within that county to be able to provide resources for, we have about a 94% engagement rate there. So that's really exciting with that community. When you look at the different way we level people out, again, I've already covered levels of care, but they are very different. And I wanted to touch base on this just to show you that if someone is identified as being a pregnant mother, or if someone is identified on being on the sex offender registry, we do make sure we identify that, because we believe that we know that their needs will be a little different, and it allows us a way to interact and support to make sure that we're looking at those individual needs they may have. We're sharing that information with relevant partners, and that we're looking to make sure that any way they're moving forward, that those needs are going to have a dramatic impact on what kind of resources we get for them. So we do have ways to engage and identify individual needs beyond just the basic levels of care. And I wanted to show this. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this slide, but I did want to show you that when you look at the process, so this is if someone is a level, I believe this is a, yeah, it's a level A. So if someone is identified as a level A, they're going to be in jail for an undetermined amount of time. You can see that there's a whole step process we do as we go through this process between the teams and the supervisors, that we're looking at various levels of need as they go through. And that depending on the way some of the questions are answered, it tells us how we're responding and what we're doing with the individual. So it's a pretty intensive process. And it is kind of outlined pretty clearly to make sure that we're providing the right support at the right time for the right reason. And then ultimately our outcomes we're looking to cover, we're really trying to increase recovery communities in the jails. We want to build, and we saw this in Howard County. We were able to really build a pretty strong recovery community in the jail, where people were really talking a lot about recovery community. And there was a lot of people who were interested in interacting on one-on-one support, beginning to talk about what it is to do recovery planning, what would my recovery journey look like, what kind of treatments are available for me. So this idea of building, increasing recovery community in the jail is really important. A reduction in jail population. When we started working in the Howard County Jail, the population was around 540. It would go up and down a little bit. And we were able to get that number down, not just us, but other partners were able to get that number down successfully between, I'd say, 410 and about 450. So we did have a pretty great impact on the jail population numbers. And when you look at decreasing addiction and mental health stigma, getting people talking more about their mental health, identifying what mental health is, how do you know if you have some mental illness or some struggles with mental illness, and how to begin to talk about that. Increasing reentry transition planning and support. Again, making sure that one of the biggest mantras we talk about when we talk about the IRACS program is the idea that we want to rethink reentry from day one. So instead of thinking about people getting out from the time they leave jail or once they're identified as leaving jail, we want to begin to look at what is the right process, what is the right approach, what is the right place for individuals and meeting their levels of need and the kind of care that they need, and begin to think about what would it look like for them to successfully reenter back into the community from the first moment they get to jail. That way we're beginning to talk about what that would look like and look at those needs immediately. Again, we always know that individuals are at the highest risk for overdose in the first 2 weeks after leaving incarceration. I think the rate is 127% higher in that first 2 weeks. So we want to try and do what we can to keep people on the radar, keep them engaged. So our reentry peers meet them at the door of the jail and stay with them for 30 days after they leave. And our goal with that is, one, to keep them engaged, to make sure they have the right resources, but we also want to know if they fall off the radar or if for some reason they fall back into use, because then they are at a much higher risk for overdose death. Increasing treatment engagement, increased SIM collaboration, so getting our peers and community partners begin to talk about diversion and other forms of intercepts we can put into our processes to make sure that we're looking at the right levels of needs and interventions for those we can. Increase harm reduction efforts upon release and decrease barriers. So, so far the model that we do have set up does have a successful regional hub and spoke model. So this would be a great way to expand IRACS moving forward, looking at a regional hub and spoke model. And we do have a new implementation plan and that we're looking at providing technical assistance and support. It looks like about a 6-month rollout for different communities. So we're going to be presenting that in the spring. So I think that's really all I have right now. I'll go ahead and shut this out here. Maybe if I can get out of here. There we go. All right, there we go.
Does anyone have any questions?
I have a couple questions. How can we get this in our community? What does that take?
First and foremost, I would say that asking for it is a great way to start. So I would say that communicating with your mayors, your commissioners, your state partners, DMHA, the governor's office, and saying, hey, we would really love to have this in our community. That would be a great place to start. 2, I can say that in our conversation with the governor's office that there are already plans to expand this and look at expansion. What that expansion looks like ultimately will be determined by the successful numbers as these pilots roll out throughout the year. But I will say that expansion talks are already kind of happening and going, which is good. At this point, I just have no idea what that may look like. If that's going to be statewide, if that's going to be a rollout. I can tell you that we do have a model put together to roll it out in cohorts with some readiness surveys and some prep surveys that go out to the communities. But again, whether or not that'll be the model that will be chosen or how the state will decide to roll it out is, I really can't speak to that at this point in time. But I will say, on behalf of Forensic Services, Mental Health America, and the IRACS program, please let people know that you'd be interested in having that. And if you want to come out and see the program yourself, please let me know. I would love to take you guys on a tour of the jail and let you see the program in action.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Will you send out your PowerPoint?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Yeah, because I've been in 3 separate conversations this week alone about these very issues. The majority of the people in all of our jails are there because of substance use disorder, and they're released, and we expect them to stay substance free and get a job and be a good citizen. And they're not always set up with the tools to be able to do that. And we have someone in our community that's a volunteer that every day she's picking people up and driving them to other counties because our county doesn't have any open beds, and she's trying to find them ways to help them get jobs. And it's just very overwhelming. And I know that it's not isolated for Kosciuszko County.
Yeah. Well, in our conversation with the jails, again, I said we interviewed about 20 different jails across the state. And what we heard consistently was there are a high number of individuals in the jails who are struggling with substance use disorder and or mental illness. And so we know that's pretty consistent across the board. Absolutely. But I think, I think the great thing about the program like this is that, like Delaware County has a team of 8 people in their jail working 40 hours a week on this specific conversation with the population that we're talking about. So it makes a big impact. Some of the smaller jails have 5 individuals that are working on a team 40 hours a week. So having that kind of team working collaboratively with your courts and prosecutors and probation officers and your recovery community and the great community teams through the Indiana Recovery Network. I mean, it's a great model for success with that strong collaboration. Provides a lot more resources for people.
This may have been covered. I'm sorry if this was covered, I had to take a phone call. But is there like time cuts given to participants while they're in the jail? Do they get any type of perk for doing the program?
Well, so, some of the counties are doing it a little differently. What we're seeing generally and what we're encouraging is that when you think about, an intercept, like a sequential intercept model, what we want to be able to provide is identify individuals who are not a safety risk for the community, but are struggling with substance use disorder and or mental health. And we want to try and provide opportunities for those individuals to engage a program, complete a program, and look at diversion or sentence modification. So in some of the counties, they're saying, hey, once we identify the individuals who meet these qualifications, we'll sit on those charges, because the prosecutor can sit on a charge for up to a year. We'll sit on those charges if they complete the program, which is about a 9-month. The intensive part of the initial program is about 9 months. If they complete the intensive 9-month program and then continue forward with the ongoing services following, then at the end of that time period, the prosecutor's office will review your case and either reduce or completely dismiss the charges altogether. So, and that's the idea of diversion, because again, we're reducing harm for individuals.
But you're doing this you're doing this while they're incarcerated.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. We start that right at the very beginning.
So 9 months of incarceration.
No, just 9 months of the program. So they can finish some of that in jail and they can finish the rest of that in the community. So that they can start some of the programming in jail and then they can finish the rest of it in the community. That's what that continuum of care.
Right.
That's the good part about that.
So I work for the court alcohol and drug program. So that's why I'm trying to figure out how this would work, because we're also doing a pretrial program here. So I am very interested in this because It sounds like to me, it's almost like a pretrial program.
Yeah, well, and that's why each one of the sites has a pretrial officer assigned to it. Because what we want to do is say, in those early stages, right, of the legal process, if we can identify individuals that the court and prosecutors and attorneys would feel like would greatly benefit from a program like this, that they can finish the 9-month of the matrix programming that we have, the matrix classes, and the RAP program, which is the mental health component of that. They're peer driven. And then they can also do one-on-one peer support, and they through that program piece, and they can do as much of that in jail as long as they're in jail, and then they can finish that once they get released and are out in the community. They complete that component of it, and then they can say, hey, here was the agreement when you started this, and here's what the prosecutor or the court's going to do at the end of that process. Either reduce the charges or dismiss the charges or whatever the court decides to do that they agreed on at the pretrial mark. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does actually. So I see some other people have asked for a recording of this. I would like to add my name to the list and
Yeah,
the PowerPoint.
so I have seen quite a few of those requests. We do post recordings of every webinar on the information exchange section of the Coalition Network website. And then when presenters give us their PowerPoints as well, we also post that in the same place. So that goes for all of them, as long as the presenter is comfortable with us sharing their PowerPoints. That will always be on the information exchange. So if you're newer to our calls and you're not a member of the Coalition Network, like you don't have a login for the website, I don't believe you can access the information exchange. So if you don't have a login and you'd like one, you can stay on after we finish this call, and we can give you the information of how to get set up on there, so you can grab that.
And I'd be more than happy if someone wants to reach out to me. I'd be more than happy to introduce you to some of the prosecutors and some of the court people that can talk about what they're doing in the individual counties. Every one of the counties is a little different, and maybe in different little places. But I think all 5 counties are really working pretty hard at trying to identify what they feel like is the right plan for them and their communities and their court processes. So we're trying to be very supportive of that across the board.
Well, are there any more questions for Jamie?
Jamie, can you put your contact information in the chat box?
I will do that right now.
Thank you.
Well, if there are no more questions for Jamie, thank you so much for presenting to us today. I know that's great information for our counties that a lot of us need to know. So we really appreciate your time today.
Absolutely. It was an absolute pleasure to be here.
Yes, thank you. I believe we have some Sadia from ICJI on the call. Would you like to give any updates, Sadia?
Hi, everyone. I don't have a lot to say today, except letting everybody know that we have sent some modification requests for the submission of the first quarterly report. If you are the county who has received modification request, we are asking you to do the timely submission in the IntelliGrant so that we can close our process. And the second thing, I want to just say that loud that we have been sending emails about the different state grant opportunities. So I would like you guys to keep an eye on those emails, because those grant opportunities might be beneficial for your local coordinating council. And that's all I have from ICJI. Thank you.
Thank you, Sadia. At this time, I think we will give you guys a little bit of time back to your day. Our next webinar is going to be on September 22nd, same time, noon. We'll send out the reminder like we always do. But at this point, if you need a login for the Coalition Network, you need to get onboarded, feel free to stay on. The rest of the leadership team will stay on for a couple minutes so we can help you guys with any questions you have in that regard. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today, and to get some time back.